Very nice to meet you. Yeah, so I was thinking we could take like 40, 45 minutes and talk about our views. I think that there's a good audience right now for this kind of exchange of views because it's like such a complex subject, and I don't think that you're getting that many matchups of like reasonably smart people sharing their views. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Sweet. Um, all right, nice, man. Yeah, so we can pretty much dive in. Here, let me make sure we got Zoom's recording. So yeah, I'll just, I'm happy to send you the recording. I'll probably be tweeting clips or whatever. Um, and then yeah, so just like set the stage. Maybe tell me a little about yourself, and like summarize your views really quick, and I'll tell you my views because my goal is also to be able to like repeat each other's. That's like a large goal of this conversation, right? We're probably not going to be super convincing to each other, but at least let's understand each other's views.
No, totally. And I think it's a good conversation to have. I think a lot of people are confused and scared, and how you decide to progress with that is important. This is a critical technology, and it will probably be a shaping technology of the next 100 years. Although I heard that rocks float now, so who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows? I'm excited about those floating rocks. Anyway, so in terms of background, I grew up pretty humble. I grew up in the projects in Boston, lost both my parents by the time I was 10. Went to college really to understand like the universe kind of vibes, like, okay, what is this system that's like, screwing over my family or whatever. And, kind of settled in economics and computer science as like the primary path to doing that. Ended up at Oxford doing game theory back before like any of this like Bayesian stochastic stuff was relevant to tech really. I mean, it was relevant, but it wasn't really like faddish, and it certainly wasn't fun to code as an economist, so they didn't like that very much. I was doing all these like simulations of ideas going through networks. And more or less just because I was interested in markets in the world, I ended up going to finance instead of more kind of academic theoretical world. And I spent the majority of my career as a quantitative trader at Lehman Brothers and Bridgewater Associates, which is a large global macro fund. Kind of topped out there as the head of their commodities group. It's a very big, asset class for them. Basically using data to trade markets, right, and doing it with the lens of a practitioner and someone who was more of a finance person than a data person. And then, kind of from that experience, just was very excited in what was happening with, you know, uh, really like NLP, word to vec came out, that kind of stuff, and just struggling around with data so much and thinking the robots should do this, the robots should do this. And so I started a company called Rose, which is, effectively trying to leverage AI and, modern data infrastructure for financial institutions, which are radically backward and opaque and broken, all the normal stuff you'll hear. And I think my views on AI in particular are very much a function of that experience of a practitioner, right? I do math. I'm not a pure mathematician. I'm not a pure computer scientist. I'm a person who has to get data to update to trade a market. And if the data doesn't update, I don't know what my position is or what I should do. And if I lose $1 million, I get fired because the data didn't update, right? And so I became very much like both enamored with tech and experience with the pain of tech breaking and failing and all these other things. And so, that's kind of I don't know, I would say that's kind of where my philosophy in this kind of lies, which is seeing the potential of the tools, but also realizing their limitations, and those being a function of the limitations of the people and the systems behind them. And so I don't know, we could talk more about the specific objections. I have a couple of points that I think we might disagree on, and kind of where I see the argument lying, but that's kind of me.
Okay, great. Yeah. And then in terms of the AI position, right? So how would you summarize like your opening statement or just like, what do you think is going to happen with AI in the future? And what's your position and what position do you argue against generally? Some background on that.
Yeah, I think most people in this debate miss out on the distinction between existential risk and catastrophic risk. I think it's clear that AI, just like any technology, can and will cause harm. Like every big technology has had huge disruptive forces on the world, like printing press, caused the 30 Years' War or whatever. Like that, we should expect to happen, and we should be responsible about how we develop that technology. I think when you start getting the existential world, the arguments get kind of so not even abstract, but so ad extremis that you really need to be an economist or a game theorist or a computer science to even participate in the conversation. And what ends up happening is that you get a narrowing of the scope of who can participate to the point where now we just have this chorus of existential risk, existential risk, existential risk. And I don't think it's existential at all. I think that it's existential insofar as humans do bad things with it, and that in the scope of technology, it should be regulated consistent with those, and that the difficulties around regulating it and the difficulties around safetyists from saying what they actually want to do outside of just a wholesale abandonment of technology development is a function of that. Because we don't know what we're really talking about, or because we don't know what the problems are, there's this kind of histrionic yelling back and forth between these two tribes, as opposed to
Mhm.
being very practical. I put out a small blog post a couple months ago called "How to Regulate AI," and I think it's pretty easy. You just put it under the consistent Western legal framework of individual responsibility, and you extend that to the operation of machines,
Mhm.
where you try to find a human that's actually responsible for the harms caused by a machine breaking or a machine doing something wrong, and that's how you try to tie up these incentives. Now, I think that gets us pretty far. I think it gets us 20 years, maybe 50 years, maybe 100 years of like good times without the robots taking out, depending on where your curve is. But I agree, like 1,000 years from now, like who the hell knows what's going to happen? Like if the robots get pretty smart, like we're going to have a weird universe in 1,000 years. I have some mathematical objections about why that won't be existential, but that's kind of my position.
Cool. Okay, sounds good. So I'll do my side. Yeah, so
Yeah,
my background is computer science. Been programming since I was 9 years old, and then I've been following less wrong and AI safety since 2007. Actually, pretty early days.
awesome.
I'm firmly in the Eliezer Yudkowsky camp. So I
Yep.
do consider the writing highly insightful. I've spent thousands of hours on it. So I'm like a less wrong scholar in terms of hours invested. Um, and I tend to be kind of a one-track mind on the issue of just like I think that we're building something that is kind of a runaway chain reaction, right? So, we doomers, we love using the nuke analogy. And I think the reason the analogy is so compelling is because I do think we're going to get into a situation where it's kind of like a one button press or like a one running program where it's like quickly reaches the point of no return, analogously to like, the nuclear reaction that's gone critical. When you have a nuclear bomb that's past that point of going critical, the only time it's going to stop is when it runs out of fuel, right? There's no other human intervention that's going to stop a bomb that's in the progress of exploding, right? Is that fair to say? Just as an analogy. I mean, as a
Sure. I mean, you're
logically
talking about
valid
you're
situation.
talking about a chemical process, not a
Yeah,
mechanical
yeah, no,
process,
I
but
know.
yeah.
Yeah, so sorry, I'm just asking if you understand the analogy, right? I'm
Yeah,
not
yeah, of course.
okay. So that's the thing I'm analogizing to is the bomb in the process of exploding. And I think all of the work you can do is to either prevent it from exploding or to make sure that you know that it has a finite amount of fuel, right? Because that's what saves us, right? When the Russian Tsar Bomba explodes, it's like I think 50 megatons, like some insane amount. The only thing that then saved us is the fact that it didn't have more megatons, right? Like that's it. And so the problem with AI is there's no megaton limit. When the AI starts exploding, it's going to feed on everything, right? Like every atom, every neg entropy is a source of further explosion. And so we really only have one chance to press that button. And I think we're kind of wandering right into it. I think we're going to press it. I think it's pretty imminent. And I have kind of a mental model of why this should be the case, where the crux of it that I don't think is well understood this late in the game is this idea of consequentialist reasoning, right? Goal to action mapping, right? That's kind of like the one weird trick that makes humans different from apes, right? It's when we talk about intelligence, I don't even bother using the term intelligence. I just talk about the part that's more directly the source of power, which is the goal to action mapping. It's the thing that our ape ancestors can do in special cases, but they can't do it in the general case. They can't map backwards what it takes to go to the moon, but we can because we've become sufficiently general, right? We have the one weird trick with kind of no generality restrictions. We've transcended the generality required to reason about anything. So that's what I think is analogous to a nuclear explosion is once you have goal to action mapping, there's kind of no limit to how far you can explode. And the more powerful your mapping is, the more unstoppable your explosion is. So that's kind of my mental model in a nutshell. I think we're about to press the button, the nuke's about to be exploding, and we're really not addressing the situation with the urgency it requires.
So, okay, I mean, this is a fair framework. We can deal with your framework first. I think it's a good place to start for sure. And I think that this does come up a lot. And the nuclear analogy, I'll give you another one, we kind of tie off you, which is the smartest person in high school the most powerful?
Mhm. Yeah, sure. And so that, that gets largely to the definition of smart, right? Which is why I prefer to sidestep even using the term smart, right? Because it's ultimately what I'm trying to convince people of is like, we're doomed, right? And the reason we're doomed is fundamentally because of goal to action mapping. So that concept, I believe, is closely related to the concept of humans being smart, but it's not really critical to my argument to convince you that it's closely related to you. You see what I'm saying? So it's like, so are you sure you even want to talk about humans being smart when I'm just making a claim about goal to action mapping?
Yeah, I'm saying imagine the highest potential goal to action mapper in high
Hmm.
school. They
Yeah.
exist. Someone in your high school existed that
Hmm.
had that. Were they the most powerful person in high school?
So almost by definition, the person in high school who's the best at mapping their goals to actions is the person who's most successfully getting what they want, right? Whether that's to be popular or to be the best, winner of the sports game or whatever it is.
Yeah, I just don't. I don't agree with you, and I think that that's probably the rub, and it deals with your nuclear argument because I think that when you think about power, right, which is part of what's happening here, we're conflating intelligence and power, and goal to action mapping. I'm not sure I even totally grok what you're saying, so maybe I'm just missing it. But it's like you have the smartest. Like I went to high school where I was neither the smartest or the most powerful.
Hmm.
Okay, and I knew who the smartest person was, and I knew who the most powerful person was, and I kind of knew why they were they. And if you think about it, like the person who's the most smart, you don't really need consent from anybody else to be smart,
Hmm.
to be in high school. But to be powerful, you need consent from other people. The like jockey football player who like runs around and bosses people is powerful because other people are giving that person power. And I think there's a good analogy here to AI where you talk about the runaway explosion. And I say, look, the mechanism by which we limit the fuel for that explosion is the power that we give to these machines, how much autonomy they have,
Hmm.
what kinds of effect they can have in the world. Maybe this is where your action mapping comes in, but I think that's that critical joint. Maybe we can agree on that, which is the what tools, what abilities do we endow these machines with to affect the real world, right? Like I agree with you. Like if you had like the entire Chinese nuclear system and the entire American nuclear system pointed at each other playing tic-tac-toe, like in that movie back in the day, you know what I mean? Like you would probably get some sort of stupid reaction where they both blow each other up,
Hmm.
right? And so to me, that's a good example of why we probably shouldn't do that.
Okay. I mean, it sounds like you're not engaging directly with my hypothetical of like my premise is just, I think AIs are going to get really, really good at mapping goals to action. And you mentioned like you might not be 100% clear on what I mean by that. So there's a thought experiment created by Eliezer Yudkowsky. He calls it the outcome pump. And the outcome pump is a way to talk about the logical ideal of what it means to map a goal to an action without worrying about the details of like, wait, how can it be that smart, right? How does the intelligence work? It doesn't matter how the intelligence works. With the idea of an outcome pump, you just define a goal, like I want this money in my bank account. You just define a goal. And then you imagine that every possible universe just gets tried. And then the ones that don't match your goal get filtered out. So somehow you just end up in the goal state, right? The algorithm is literally like brute force. There's no intelligence. It's like brute force, exponential size brute force. And the beauty of this thought experiment is it's really precisely defines what an ideal goal to action mapper does. And then we can talk about, how closely can algorithms approximate that. But before we talk about how closely can algorithms approximate that, we can talk about the logical implications of what it would mean to have a really good goal to action mapper.
I'm still confused as to whether the smart kid in high school is a good call to action mapper because to me it
Mhm.
seems like you can have someone who can imagine all the different states of the universe and maybe in one of those states they like get the girl or whatever. But if in 99.9999999% of the cases the jock gets the girl
Mhm.
because the ecosystem has been put in place, that I think to me it doesn't win the argument, but it does poke a hole in this kind of what I see
Yeah.
this I think it's called instrumental convergence or whatever. This idea
Yeah,
of
yeah, but
like,
sorry, I feel like you may be misunderstanding because I mentioned a scenario where, you're filtering out 99% of the world and you're zooming in on the 1% of the ones that satisfy your goal. But that filtering step, imagine it just happens magically, right? So like
no,
in
I'm
your
not. I'm saying, yeah, there's one of them and there's 99.919,
no,
and
I
your
know, but
jump as to saying focus on the one. Sure,
yeah,
we can
but
focus on the
you're
one. It doesn't
tying it, but you're
mean,
tying it to a smart person, and I feel like you're kind of confused at how I'm
okay.
structuring the definition. So the difference between like a function and an algorithm, right? So a function is just talking about input output, and then an algorithm is talking about the steps to get to the output from the input. You know that difference. I mean, have you studied computer science at all?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So Generally, when you have an algorithm, the point of the algorithm is to achieve an input-output function, right? So what I'm doing here when I talk about an outcome pump is I'm actually defining a function. I'm not even talking about, so when you talk about a smart kid in high school who gets what he wants 1% of the time, you're kind of opening up
No,
my
I was
definition.
saying he can imagine, because you
Yeah,
were
yeah,
asking, can he map? I was saying, no, he
yeah.
can imagine all of the possibilities. He can map
Okay.
to all of the outcomes. And then
Mhm.
you're saying, okay, now he can focus on the one and get the one that he wants or whatever.
So, okay. It's like I said, it's there. I'm kind of trying to seal off an abstract definition, and you're kind of opening up the details of it and like mixing them. Like you're kind of mixing what I'm trying to say. Um, I'm just trying to say that the ideal goal to action mapper that doesn't even run an algorithm, that just like does magic, right? Does the magical mapping of the function in one step magically. The way that would look like is they have a goal, and then like in the blink of an eye, they've achieved their goal. It wouldn't look like they've achieved their goal 1% of the time. Maybe 1% of world states involve them achieving their goal, but it would just look like you blink and you're there. Like you're always there
Okay.
somehow.
Okay. I'm still saying that, yeah, I'm not
Yeah.
disagreeing with you. I'm saying
Okay.
the smart kid can do that too. I understand there's a distinction
Okay. Great.
between
Great. Great.
living in the 1% and knowing that there is a 1% or a 1 in over n% chance or whatever.
Okay, so to tie it to the smart kid, so if the smart kid was such a good goal to action mapper, by my definition, if they're really good at mapping goals to actions, then it would look like the smart kid has almost a perfect success rate achieving their goals, even when their goals seem unlikely.
Right. And I'm saying that you're
Okay.
now abstracting over power, and you're using this goal to action map
Mhm.
a framework to obscure how power works in the real world. And you're
Okay.
also making the halting problem mistake, which is
Yep.
and this is Eliezer's step one,
Mhm.
which is he just assumes it away, period. He assumes away halting, he assumes away
Mhm.
Gödel's incompleteness. And
Yeah.
then we make this argument of an extremist. Obviously, an optimizing agent would want all the power in the universe, because all the power in the universe
Mhm.
strictly dominates not having power, right? This comes back to the reality for me of how we endow machines, humans, algorithms with power.
Yes, so I know that on Twitter you mentioned that the Gödel incompleteness problem and Turing's halting problem are like kind of where you get off part of the argument. So I do want to talk about those, but did you want to first kind of finish talking about smart humans and like whether smart humans are actually powerful? Do you think there's more substance there that we should address?
No, I'm just saying, to be clear, it could be that I haven't read the 5,000 thing on goal to action mapping. Like, I'm just saying that the goal to action mapping, to me, if you try to force it into the framework that I'm trying to force it into, reconcile
Mhm.
these two frameworks, it doesn't show that you're wrong or I'm wrong. I'm not saying
Mhm.
you're wrong or I'm wrong. I'm saying that it shows that we have a disagreement about how power works.
Mhm.
And that imagining all of the states in the world and then getting the one you want, is a story I can understand,
Mhm.
but it's a story that when you try to put it in the context of real outcomes, real worlds, practitioner again, me here, you get into this question of, well, it seems pretty important how much power we give these machines. And if you just assume that every machine is a perfect action mapper with perfect rationality, with perfect foresight, you're going to get into some weird places. And so the way to focus is, again, I just might not understand your goal to action
Mhm.
mapper, but
Yeah.
that in doing so, in providing some measure of agency over that world, right? You're obscuring how power
Mhm.
is
Yeah.
endowed.
Let me step back. Let me just give you the overview of my whole argument again, because it's
Okay.
quite simple and quite scary. That's why I keep repeating it. And the argument is it's kind of two steps. The first step is I think we're close to powerful goal to action mappers. That's the first step. To instantiating in algorithms goal to action mappers. So the first step is I think this is feasible near term. And the second step is, as a matter of pure logic, if you score really high on the goal to action mapping spectrum, like if you have a high IQ, but it's not IQ, it's goal to action mapping power. Okay. There's this dimension.
Power.
If
You did it again. You just did it again, though.
okay, goal to action mapping,
That's my point. That's my point. Is
quantification.
you're assuming
Yeah.
almost godlike abilities, and I'm saying that the way that I'm not even willing to concede godlike intelligence.
Okay, but I'm just laying out the argument, right? So you can tell me what you disagree with in a
Okay,
sec.
okay,
But the
okay.
second step, the first step is I think goal to action mapping, high scoring goal to action mapping facility, right? Whatever that quantification means, I think that it's feasible. And then the second step is logically, if such a thing were to exist, if such a capability existed in our universe, the logical implications of that are disastrous, right? So just two steps. I think it's feasible, and I think that once it exists, it's
I'm not even on
disastrous.
board with the disaster
Okay.
part.
Okay,
I'm
great.
not
Yeah,
even on board with
so
the
we can zoom
disaster
in on
part.
that, right? And the reason I talked about the outcome pump, right? The reason I talked about the blink of an eye and the universe filters down to the states you want it without any algorithm running, just magically, right? The reason I gave you that thought experiment of the outcome pump is so that we can zoom into the second step of my argument and not worry about feasibility and just worry about would this be disastrous?
Go for it. I mean, I'm still not sure I'm with you, but go for it.
So imagine you had an outcome pump in your pocket, right? Everybody's laptop was an outcome pump, right? And people just like type in world states, and then the whole world would snap to that world state.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
You forgot time and you just forgot strategy.
But I thought, I mean, in the second step of my argument, you grant the premise, right?
No, you just no. You.
Okay, so maybe
I'm
you want to
saying.
go
I'm
to the
saying.
first step of my argument.
Imagine you have two of them. What happens?
Yeah, so if you have two of them,
Who
so
wins?
well, just as a simple example, imagine you just have
Gödel.
one person who's a dick, right? So say 1 in a million people in the world are happy to just end the world. That I think that's fair to say that 1 in a million people want it all to end. So those such people just type end and it ends. Like, and there's no undo.
And
There's
again,
no
you're
undo
just,
outcome
and I'm
pump,
saying you're
unfortunately.
just misunderstanding power, because if you allow yourself to have two of these agents operating strategically in a time sense, where you've now brought time back into it, you do not necessarily get exactly what you want. Because
Yeah.
if you have infinity on one hand and you have infinity on the other hand, what happens when you divide an infinity by infinity?
Yeah. So, so it sounds like you're willing to grant me the premise that if one asshole had an outcome pump to himself for a year, that person could end the universe. And so your whole safety claim is going to rest on, multiple outcome pumps competing, within that first year time frame, so that the first outcome pump doesn't have a chance to destroy everything.
And the meta point of, and therein in our distinction as to how the world works, is a difference in perspective about how power works and how machines work. In that
Okay, but it sounds like you're willing to concede, right, that if one person had an outcome pump, right, and nobody else had it for a year, and that person was an asshole, right, then certainly I feel like this is an easy premise to grant, right, that in that scenario, then we're doomed.
So if you have one person who has a nuke that can blow up the whole universe, and they want to blow up the whole universe, and you give them the power to blow up the whole universe, then sure, they'll blow up the whole universe.
Okay, so it sounds like, so you're really concerned, right, with making sure that, so like your nightmare scenario would be an AI lab where there's an evil person running it and they get far ahead of everybody. Because in that situation, you'd be like, oh shit, that looks bad. You wouldn't be like, well, even those people wouldn't blow up the world because software is powerless. No, you'd be like, oh shit, that's actually bad. But that's unlikely. But
No,
you're granting that it would be
you just
bad.
did it again. No, because
Okay.
again, remember, in the first case, you said the person has the nuke, nobody else has the nuke, and they're a jerk, right? I'm saying, no, being smarter, being an AI lab that's better than other people doesn't mean that the goals are misaligned. It doesn't mean they have the power to do these things. And it doesn't matter that someone who's in a strategic bitemporal game can catch up with them or not.
Well, okay, when you say it doesn't mean that the goals are misaligned. So I gave you a scenario, right? I'm just trying to find out, like, how, where I'm trying to map out the boundaries of your position, right?
We talked about the evil. My position is just you're wrong on like 15 different places. That's why it might be stressful.
I know, right? So I'm trying to carve out some subset of what I'm saying where you would be like, okay, if I grant all these premises, then you're right. But let me walk back to
I said in the place where there's one evil person who has the power, who has the goals that are misaligned, and they have the ability and willingness to do something bad, that they might be willing to do something bad. And then you replied, well, then it must be bad for one AI lab to be more advanced than the other.
No, I just said so. No. I'm just fleshing out the hypothetical. I'm saying if one AI lab was run by somebody who's evil and they get a really big head start, right, and the AI becomes a really, really good gold action mapper, are you then willing to say that in that nightmare scenario, we're screwed?
Again, gold action mapper. We're just not going to agree. Like if the AI, which is currently smart, not a gold action mapper, currently smart was what you said. And then you transfer it over to gold action mapping because it gets you the outcome you want.
So when I said AI lab, I wasn't trying to be like AI lab with today's technology. I was saying AI lab that races ahead, develops a good gold action mapper that's vastly superhuman.
Again, you're still doing it because right now what I'm willing to concede is that AI labs are trying to make smart machines. Not that they're trying to make smart gold action mappers, because my claim is that your definition of gold action mappers obviates my claim about how power works. So every time you say a good gold action mapper, a good gold action mapper, you're just assuming the premise that you
Okay. So it sounds like, okay, I think I see what you're saying. You're just saying there's just no hypothetical. Even if I try to tweak all the details, the whole premise that there's an AI and it's really good at mapping goals to actions, and there's an evil genius who built it who's way ahead of everybody else. Even then, you're saying that we're probably safe because it's not like gold action mapping power is going to be that dangerous.
No, I'm just saying that your driver in the variable, right, is assuming the thing that we're trying to talk about in a way that makes it hard. And this is why all the rationalists get, I think, trapped in a box, because in a way which assumes the premise. And then every time I come back and disagree with your logical chain, you come back with the action mapping stuff. And I'm saying, I don't know, man, I'm in the real world where a bunch of labs are making smart robots, and how and what we decide to give them power over is the most important decision. Not,
for sure.
should we make them less smart, which is what all the doomers say.
Okay, but it's just so you understand, like when I'm asking you these questions, I'm trying to map out your position. And it sounds like in the process of mapping out your position, I have to ask you what happens if this variable tweaks, what happens because I'm trying to understand how your mental model, right? But you seem to keep coming, you seem to not willing to be engaging in hypotheticals.
Let me ask you a question that's hypothetical then. Okay. So let's assume that there is a direct mapping between intelligence and power, which I have said I disagree with, but I'm willing to concede that for this argument. Okay, so we're assuming that there is a mapping from intelligence to power. Okay, now, if that were to be the case, and you were to be of your perspective, which is that that is existentially dangerous, which I think is a reasonable perspective if you think what you think. Okay, then wouldn't the reasonable conclusion be that we have to stop not only AI, but all technology advancement? Right. Because it's existential.
Right. So yeah, so this is the policy discussion, and I know we're already in the last, moving into the last third of our discussion here. But yeah, so let's make sure to hit on what you're asking.
No, I'm saying logic, like forget policy. I'm just saying if intelligence is power, which I don't agree with, but I'm willing to concede for this argument because it's your perspective, then I think the only way to be morally consistent is to not only argue against GPUs, but to argue against all technology, because it is inevitable in the case of a direct mapping between intelligence and power and all this instrumental convergence stuff, that the actual enemy is not the people developing the AIs, it's technology itself.
Well, right? I mean, an aluminum can is an example of technology, right? But I wouldn't argue that, you know, a proliferation of aluminum cans is going to be analogous to a nuclear chain reaction. I wouldn't make that argument. So which technology?
Okay, so then which technologies?
I would make it very specific to the emergence of, you know, superhuman goal to action mapper. That's the technology I'm worried about. I'm also somewhat worried about nukes, but by far I'm most worried about goal to action mappers.
What does a goal to action mapper look like in the real world? I may just be confused.
Yeah, sure. It looks like any physical process. So you can even think about it like a GPT prompt, where if you ask it a question like, how do I make the most money? It really tells you, like the way an outcome pump would tell you, like, you know, this series of events, you know, this go and build a nanomachine. Like here are plans. You can you can build some proteins, right? You can build some diamondoid versions of the proteins, and it's going to assemble a factory, and it's going to like disassemble the earth atom by atom. And by the end of this, you will have a bank account with a large balance in it, right? So that would be a goal to action mapper.
But then you have to go do that stuff, right? Like the fact that Russians knew about nukes in 45 didn't mean that they could make nukes. They had to spend 10 years making them.
So you really think that the bottleneck to us staying alive is going to be that the AI is going to know exactly what to do, and it just can't map the information, you know, the electrical impulses?
No, it's the power. It's the power.
You don't think that it can map modulated electrical impulses to you know, to physical motions?
No, it's that here's what's going to happen. If you're right, okay, then we guarantee that we get existential death or a butler in jihad. Guaranteed, if you're right. If there is a direct correlation between intelligence and takeover,
and I agree, we should pause AI because I don't want to get existential death.
I'm saying it's not just AI. It's all technology. It's smartphones. It's databases.
But I don't see how the next aluminum can makes us more. Okay, but it's not aluminum cans, right? So I'm going to draw the line somewhere.
Spectrum,
yeah,
right?
and I'm defining. It's not that hard for me to say. I mean, I've already drawn the boundary. There's no other tech. VR, you know, fire away, right? But AI, no, right? So like this isn't in practice. This hasn't been a hard distinction for me to operationalize.
How do you define AI?
So it's instead of trying to define AI, I would just define what I don't want to build, which is I don't want to build an algorithm that can map goals to actions better than humans can. And for example,
I'm not dumb. Let's say I'm in the middle for less wrong. I don't think that's true, but let's say I'm in the middle of less wrong.
Okay.
After 45 minutes of talking with you, I still don't know how I could take this goal to action mapping framework and distinguish from a smartphone.
Yeah. Okay. So you can say, hey, does this algorithm have a space of inputs that describe goals and map them to outputs that describe actions, such that The actions are superhumanly effective at getting to the goals.
You just defined quant funds.
Yeah, well, if the quant fund was automated at a superhuman level, then I would eye it with suspicion.
I'm saying so, and then to prevent the development of superhuman quant funds, we now have to regulate quant funds. How do we do that?
If the quant fund is, if it shows a level of insight, that seems like that same level of insight could do science and manipulate the universe in many ways, then I would be like, this automated quant fund has a module within it, which is very dangerous, and we need to halt it until we understand how that's happening. Yeah, because the fact that the innards, and that's what I'm saying about GPT, by the way, when you're saying, you're acting like it's a gotcha to be like, oh my God, you just described a quant fund. People are laughing at me now because they're like, oh my God, you're making fun of, you're saying that a chatbot is dangerous. And it's the same reason, because internal to the chatbot is a module that seems to be close to being a goal to action mapper. And you can't distribute devices with these kind of modules inside it. It's too dangerous.
So we gotta get rid of smartphones. Look, well, I'm not necessarily
because a smartphone has a chip. It doesn't have a goal to action mapping algorithm that's superhuman in the general case.
It's going to in about 2 years.
Well, that's the problem. I don't want it to, right? That's my position.
And so you have different ways of doing it.
Yeah, if a smartphone comes equipped with GPT-6, which is a goal to action mapper, then I don't think you need to ban the smartphone. I think you need to ban the installed software, right?
But I just mean open the aperture, all databases, all.
Well, no, because look, there's child sexual abuse material can live on smartphones. It doesn't mean you need to ban smartphones, right? You need to ban the content. You need to. So it's possible to ban algorithmic content on a substrate. Okay,
so we need a committee to find algorithms and put them in jail.
I mean, look, you're basically telling me, hey, it's hard to operationalize. I know, I hate this.
No, I'm not a
fan of operationalizing this.
Possible. I'm making
no, it is possible. Yeah, it's possible to ban, especially if today they still require significant computational resources. Unfortunately, that's going to be declining fast. But the boundary of superhuman, we don't know how much computation it's going to take in the next few years. So there is a boundary that we can draw today if we act fast. Realistically, I agree that we're screwed and we're going to have a very hard time operationalizing it, but we can have the discussion, right? My biggest problem is people don't really want to have the discussion because they don't really buy my premise in the first place.
Well, my actual even if I conceded everything you're saying, I think just the doomer community doesn't have a response to the China argument. Yes,
I know. So these are your other beefs from Twitter, right? So you want to talk about the China argument and you want to talk about the Gödel problem, right?
Well, the Gödel problem is just an extension of the goal to action mapper thing, because it's that classic, like, less wrong thing of like, you condense it's a nice framework, but you condense all of the assumptions into like what looks to be a very tight line argument. And then the premises take 20.
Yeah, by the way, so Gödel and the halting problem. So I actually understand that very deeply. I've spent a lot of time on it. And generally Gödel and the halting problem, they don't really affect almost anything in practice, because all they do is they're saying you can never do things perfectly, right? But like all these things I'm saying to do, like a vastly superhuman goal to action mapper, you don't have to ask this device. You don't have to be like, hey, predict your own future and then do the opposite of what you're going to predict, right? That's like a very pathological thing to ask a goal to action mapper. And that's what the halting problem is telling you can't do. You can't predict your own future and then do something different. Okay, but that's fine. Like, you can still screw the world without doing that.
I think of it more like if Turing is right, and it could be wrong because of whatever, like, that means that you can't know that the robot's going to halt until you run it.
Yeah, and the fundamental reason is what I explained, right? Because the way they trap it is they say predict your own future and then do something different, right? What do you expect?
No, I'm just saying, to start with that, which is, so then you have to assume that every robot will eventually break.
Well, no. I mean, that's really not what the halting problem implies, right? I mean, humanity is subject to Gödel and Turing's laws, right? Like, the human brain cannot in the general case tell you whether something's going to halt either, right? So it's not like we're not computers, we still are.
No, exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. So I agree that an ideal AI still can't tell you whether every piece of code is going to halt, but in practice, that's a non-issue. Like, it can, it can get by really, really well.
Well, and then I'll go, okay, so start there and then ask a question, which I got one good answer on Twitter from, which was, is there any life form or any machine derived from life, not like the sun, that doesn't need a maintenance or, some form of dependence on other life forms or operators, right? So life is obviously very robust, right? Especially if you take, an ecosystem as a whole, right? Ecosystems are like pretty closed systems as long as you keep feeding in sunlight, right? So you need the neg entropy source. Yeah, and my argument is that that's our role with these computers. and it sounds kind of silly, but you're like, you need people to run the computers. And that also means that if the computers try to take over the world, they're going to fuck it up.
Well, first of all, you have the sun, right? So you have an input of neg entropy, and you have atoms that, like, there's going to be neg entropy flowing into the system that it can use. And then you're saying humans need to maintain it. But I mean, they can have robot bodies, they can have human slaves. Like, maintenance is not going to be what derails this exploding nuke.
Every life form dies, right? And so
I mean, I find that to be an incredibly shallow analogy. I mean, it's like, do you realize what computers are capable of when they can actuate, robots, and they can enslave humans? You don't think they can do maintenance?
My job is to say they never need maintenance. That's what I'm saying, is to just prove that your argument is analogous to saying they never need maintenance, they never need support, they never break.
But I'm just repeating back, you're saying super intelligent computers are not going to be able to take over the world because they're going to need maintenance. That's your argument.
I'm saying that they are going to be dependent on other things. And in the dependence on other things, power shows up. The thing that you assumed away in the beginning of your argument. And
but
so
maintenance
Gödel
is trivial. I mean, I don't understand, like,
why Turing are both saying the same thing, which is you cannot have a perfectly powerful or intelligent machine. And that intelligence is a lower bar than power.
And sorry, and what can you repeat, what is the connection between needing maintenance and violating the Gödel incompleteness theorem?
Halting.
When so you're saying that if they don't have maintenance, they're going to halt. I mean, the sense that like Turing talks about halt,
not like literally, dude.
Okay, but so I'm just trying to unpack your thoughts here, right? So I know you're saying halting is kind of like a computer needing maintenance, but like, if we don't talk about Turing, if we talk about the Gödel incompleteness theorem, Gödel doesn't use the word halt. So are you still trying to draw the analogy between Gödel's incompleteness theorem and computers needing maintenance?
Let's use Gödel's, okay?
Okay.
So Gödel says, make a big list of all the rules of the universe, right? Is that list complete? No. Why? Paradox. Because the list doesn't contain itself and all the second, third order operations, aka time, aka strategy, which are the things that as a practitioner working in quant markets, you see all the time.
Well, it is. I mean, it might be possible to finitely enumerate the rules of our physical universe, like, and then you wouldn't be able to derive every true proposition about our physical universe, but you can still finitely axiomatize our physical universe. Gödel doesn't say you can't do that.
Gödel's, I mean, axiomatize our physical universe. Well, when you say physical universe, there's a definition there. Depending on your definition, Gödel would agree with you or not. I don't know.
I mean, anyway, I feel like the Gödel objection here is like, you really, I don't think that you're like coherently connecting what it's actually saying, but and it doesn't seem related to the other arguments you're making.
I understand for you, it doesn't, but that's not my problem. Like what I'm saying is that Turing says there are limits to the system. Gödel says there are limits to the system. If you take an abstraction layer above those two things and you apply it to instrumental convergence or the perfect goal to action mapper, they say a similar thing, which is in dynamic, time-sensitive, competitive systems, there is no such thing as a perfect goal to action mapper.
Okay, so by assuming your limits, you're talking, these are sky high limits. These are so sky high. I mean, there's an analogy I use, which is like, I was making fun of people saying that the pandemic, a virus can spread exponentially. I said, I can prove to you that this virus can't spread exponentially because it's limited by the 3 dimensions of space. So it could only spread cubically. And it's like, I'm just joking. I'm just joking because that's a high ceiling. Nobody's talking about the limitations of physical space when you talk about the spread of a virus. Like, it's effectively exponential.
You're the one who said perfect goal to action mapper, dude, not me.
Okay, but look, so when I say perfect, right? Yes, it's subject to the laws of the theory of computation, but that's a sky high ceiling. So what I'm saying is there is a lot of headroom between human intelligence and then 1,000,000 miles of headroom, and then the limits of Gödel and Turing in the theory of computation. There's so much headroom above human intelligence, right? So like, I agree that there's a sky, that we can't go beyond the sky, but the sky is very high.
Right. And now we're in the place of, okay, so what do we do about that? And that's where I say, talk about what the robot can do, as opposed to trying to limit something which you're never going to be able to actually effectuate. And,
so,
China's also doing.
But even the outcome pump, right? The outcome pump can work almost perfectly for any goal without violating Gödel or Turing, right? So it's like, I really would not get hung up on the Gödel and Turing objection because you're just trying to impose this super high sky that doesn't matter.
It's the same thing as the action mapper thing. It's like 15 different algorithms, 15 different names for the same shit from Eliezer, sorry, the god or whatever, and who I think is very smart, to be clear. I'm not cracking on him, but I'm saying the same fucking argument all over again. It's, hey, perfect computer needs power. Perfect computer decides that in order to get maximum power, it needs to get rid of the humans. I understand that argument. I'm saying, stop saying perfect computer and deal in the real world, because even if you concede that it is an existential thing that'll kill humanity, in terms of what you want to do about it. If you go to that lens, you're going to be saying shit like get rid of smartphones if you're actually intellectually honest, as opposed to saying, wait, in the goal to action mapping abstraction, we forgot something about power, which is what do we decide to give the robot control over is pretty important. Time is pretty important. Different agents operating in this scenario is pretty important. And these are incredibly complex systems that are not well understood, right? And so rather than say, we should just concede AI to China, which you're effectively doing, you should say, we're in a competitive environment with someone else who's not stopping. This is potentially dangerous in a catastrophic way, maybe not an existential way. And so what to do about it becomes a lot less stressful and a lot more effective.
All right. And I know you want to hit on China. You just mentioned it now. So I'll just tell you my quick stance on China. So like, I would not use I resent calling it a prisoner's dilemma because the payoff matrix, if I'm correct, if my premise is right, that a super intelligent AI is just going to explode in your face when you build it and everybody's going to die, including us and China. If that premise is correct, the payoff matrix doesn't look like that of a prisoner's dilemma. It just looks like everybody gets a better payoff. The Nash equilibrium is actually for nobody to build AI. So there's actually no game theory.
How is everybody dying different than everyone going to jail for like 20 years? It's just a negative. Yeah, it's just a big negative payoff.
The difference is that if we build, if you accept my premise that super intelligent AI is guaranteed to be extremely dangerous, in that case, there's no advantage to the one person who builds it. Whereas in the prisoner's dilemma, if one person rats out the other, that person walks away with the huge payoff.
That's just obviously not true, though. Like,
okay, but I'm just explaining how my premise implies the game theory, right? Let's unpack.
Game theory is wrong. There's a ton of positive utility that comes from being the first person to develop this stuff.
Okay, but there's a ton of positive utility from being the first person. But again, if you accept my premise, right? So you're saying my premise is wrong.
No, I'm saying if you accept the premise, there's a 100-year time horizon, and then the AI kills us all.
Oh, okay, the 100 years. Yeah, okay. So my premise is there's a less than 20-year time. Okay, in the 100 years, sure.
Who cares about the fucking years, man? 20 years time. I'm telling you, the CCP gives a fuck ton about that 20 years, even if they concede that they die in 20 years.
So, and then, okay, so you really think you really think that people consider it a win to like be the best country for 20 years and then we all die?
I'm saying that in your ridiculous scenario where the CCP is worried about existential risk, which is how you got out of the prisoner's dilemma framework, even in that framework, they get 20 years of dominance. They care a lot about that. And so it's a prisoner's dilemma.
Yeah, if they care, if you really think that the good people of China think that being the best country in the world for 20 years, followed by having everybody die, is a win, then the payoff matrix becomes similar to that of the
I'm saying if you believe that they can be convinced of the outcome is your outcome, which is how you tried to get out of the prisoner's dilemma, that they care about the period before that time, because utility is, additive or whatever.
Okay. All right. Well, anyway, so we hit on that, and we are running out of time, but I do feel like we did kind of manage to get through, I mean, like I said, I didn't expect it to be like this major convince each other thing, but I think that like we came in, two people, two different perspectives. I feel like I can like summarize your position here. How about I try, the ideological Turing test, right?
Let's do it.
But this is fun. I should do this in all my calls. Okay. So we each take turns, basically like giving like the other person's like summary of their argument. Okay. Do you want me to go first summarizing yours? Okay. All right. So my argument is I'm not an AI doomer because I think it's like another technology. I don't think that there's like one weird trick called a gold action mapper. I don't really believe that there's this one thing that's super dangerous. I think it's going to like evolve incrementally. There's going to be lots of different AIs. It's going to be kind of like other tech always evolves, except maybe faster, but it's just like, look, tech is tech, right? It's going to be like a big brawl, a free for all. Complex dynamics are going to emerge. We got to take it one step at a time. Nobody can claim to know what's going to happen, right? So the last thing I want to do is ban smartphones or ban aluminum cans, right? Or ban anything dangerous. I just want to take it one step at a time, be reasonable about our regulations, remember our ideals like equality, right? Like I want to just be reasonable through this whole process. And I'm definitely not a doomer. And anybody who tells you, hey, the world is about to end, they don't even know what they're talking about. How's that?
Bad. Sorry.
Okay. What did I miss?
Okay. Goal to action mapping and outcome pumps are bad analogies because they do not deal with power in the real world, and they do not deal with Gödel and halting.
Okay, fair. Yeah, that is I wouldn't say what I said. I kind of give the overview and then you kind of flesh it out.
Fair. I'm just trying to deal directly.
Yeah,
with
no,
what I'm
you're right.
saying.
I should have said that. I should have said that.
And,
Okay,
and then,
anything else?
the second part is, even if you're right, okay, the competitive dynamics we find ourselves in with China are such that we currently do not have a good solution for existentialists in terms of the competitive game that we're running with them.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. Well, yeah, like what you're saying about the prisoner's dilemma. All right, fair. So that's your position. You want to take a stab at giving the Liron argument?
Yes. So it's a good argument. I'm not saying it's a bad argument. Okay. I'm just saying what I said about it, which is, look, these robots are going to get really fucking smart. At a certain point, we can call them goal to action mappers. Okay. And that means that they can effectively, more than other people, affect the world. And that's the road to ruin, period. Which I think, if you agree with that, is totally a reasonable outcome, a logical outcome from your definition of goal to action mapping.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's totally fair as a very high level overview. Okay, great. Cool. All
I'm
right.
a high level guy. I don't know.
Yeah. All right. I think I'm satisfied with what we covered. Anything else you want to touch on?
No, it was nice to meet you. And, I can be a little bit provocative. I'm not trying to, I'm just a debater from my past life. So I like to mix it up.
No, totally, man. No, I absolutely enjoyed it. I appreciate you going into the octagon with, there's certain people on Twitter who wouldn't do it. So thanks very much for your time.
Good luck. And I'm interested in how it comes out. Thank you for doing this. I think it's a public service, actually. So I appreciate it.
Awesome, man. Cool. Talk to you later.
Later.